jam-packed day, right? So we're going to continue on, right? And we're going to bring in
We
our
are.
good friend, Major General Boe Young. I believe you're going to introduce him.
Yes, indeed, David. In a remarkably varied and distinguished career, Boe Young has served as the Chief of Staff for the largest three-star command in the U.S. Army, managed one of the largest rebranding projects in retail history, reorganized a major healthcare system, and helped growing companies set strategy and growth plans in action. As a Major General in the Army Reserve, Boe was handpicked to create the Army's 75th Innovation Command, focused on bringing high technology, non-traditional company technology into the Army and leveraging the scientific and business skill sets inside the Army Reserve. Now, what's he doing now? Currently serves as the CEO of Peacemaker Partners. This is an organization that helps growing companies effectively scale and penetrate the sometimes obscure Department of Defense marketplace. So we are most grateful, very grateful for his leadership as the host of the National Security Dual Use Technology Summit. And welcome on this Wednesday, Major General Boe Young. Welcome again. Great to have you along, sir.
Hey, thanks, guys. Glad to be here. Great day. Really got a super panel here, a dream team of acquisition, strategic knowledge, and operational leadership, and fired up to be here and get started.
Great. Take it away, sir.
Super. So again, welcome everybody. And the next session we have is called No Fair Fights, equipping our military faster. And as I just said, we really have a dream team of folks that understand DoD acquisition from start to finish at the strategic level, really at the geopolitical level, and then all the way down to the nuts and bolts of how to make it happen. We have Secretary Ellen Lord with us, who's an American businesswoman who previously served as the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. For those of you who don't understand what that means, she basically was the senior weapons purchaser for the United States and responsible for overseeing hundreds of billions of dollars of weapons and services acquisition programs in the DoD. She currently is the senior advisor to multiple companies and shares her expertise after more than 30 years experience in the defense industry. She's currently at the Chertoff Group, where she provides counsel regarding defense programs, homeland security, and protection of critical infrastructure. Prior to her work in the DoD, she was the CEO of Textron Systems, a global aerospace defense, security, and advanced technologies conglomerate. We also have Lieutenant General Neil Thurgood, who serves as the Director of Hypersonics, Directed Energy Space, Rapid Acquisition in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. And in this position, General Thurgood is responsible for the rapid fielding, select capability to deter and defeat rapidly modernizing adversaries, including overseeing development of long-range offensive hypersonic weapon. Finally, backed by popular demand, one of our cohorts from one of our earlier sessions is Major General Cameron Holt. And General Holt is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Contracting with the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, Logistics in Washington, D.C. He's responsible for all aspects of contracting relating to the acquisition of weapon systems, logistics, operational support for the Air Force, and provides contingency contracting support. He oversees the training, organizing, and equipping of a workforce of over 8,000 contracting professionals who execute programs worth more than $65 billion annually. So thanks again for all of you for taking times out of what I know is an incredibly busy schedule to be with us here today. I would like to start, and this is my bias probably as an intelligence officer, but I'd like to start with a discussion about the threat, because the threat really, at least theoretically, should drive a lot of our priorities and a lot of our efforts. And General Thurgood, I'd like to start with you, and then I'll go to General Holt and then Secretary Lloyd. But how do you look at the threat from your perspective, and how does that drive the strategy of what you're working on?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bo. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, super. First of all, thanks for letting us join today. It's an honor to be with this esteemed panel. And let me just start with all our veterans out there, in uniform or out. Thanks for your service, as we're nearing Veterans Day. So it's a great thing for our nation. I think when we look at the threat, the leadership of our nation has been very clear what our pacing threats are. China, followed by Russia, and then the list continues down. Everything that we do in the defense industrial base and certainly in the material part of the Defense Department, and Honorable Lord has counseled me many times on this, is focused for the outcome to bring our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines home, right? Put them in the place and the position with the equipment they need to be successful for the mission they've been given, and then give them the opportunity, not the guarantee, but the opportunity to come home. What we are doing now is prioritizing the resources of our nation for those material outcomes that support the warfight. That is a direct result of the prioritization of what we believe as a nation represents our threats. And they're in, as General Raymond just said in the previous group, it might be in the space domain. It might be in the land domain. It might be in the sea domain. It might be in the air domain. And along with the theme, Bo, fair fights are not what we're interested in. What we're interested in is bringing dominance at the point of need on the battlefield, so that we can achieve the outcomes that have been given to us by our national leadership. The specifics of that get down into where our threat is in pacing technologies and where we need to be in relationship to that pace. Some of the technologies that are being developed may not be a direct fight on the battlefield. They might be in the other elements of national power, right? Information, economic, not just the military parts of the elements of national power. And so I think the Defense Department has done a really good job, and I'll just speak more specifically for the Army. We have been very clear for many years now on what we call the modernization strategy, the aim point and the waypoint, aim point 2035, waypoint 28, with our 31 plus 4 programs that are very specifically designed for that pacing threat. And the material community has to be focused on those outcomes, not on things we think are good, but again, as Honorable Lord used to tell us, it's not, don't do what you think you want to do what helps us win the war. Do what helps meets the requirements to bring overwhelming combat power, so there's not a fair fight on the battlefield. And so that prioritization is very clear now. And with the very clear pacing thread outlined by the Secretary of Defense and our nation's leaders, I think we have a good pointing direction. Over.
Thanks a lot, General Thurgood. I think General Holt might be having some comms problems. Why don't we'll pause on him, and Secretary Lord, if I could come to you now and get your thoughts on this issue.
Well, good morning, Bo, and thank you so much for including me. It's wonderful to be here with two former colleagues who are doing great things. I think that the Joint Staff is very clear on requirements and what we need out there. What I have focused on in the past, and continue to now on the outside, is to make sure that the department really uses all of the authorities that Congress has given it to make sure we do things at the speed of relevance. As everyone this morning has talked about, we are in a strategic competition. China is the pacing threat, and we cannot fall back on the way we have done things in the past to go where we need to be in the future. So I believe we need to have a continued focus on creative compliance, using the laws that we have, the policies, the implementation guidance, to move very quickly to field capability. And we cannot continue to look at the traditional defense industrial base, which is a very, very important part of this, But we need to look at those innovative small companies and make sure that they can move quickly to deliver their capability. Now, I think we need to train the workforce to be able to do this as well. And that's an area where sometimes we lag a little bit. I think on both the acquisition and professionals here, the generals we have on with us, have been very clear in showing that you don't need special authorities to move out crisply and quickly to get things done. And I think we need more of that leadership and more motivation for the entire acquisition community within the DoD to reach out and truly partner with our defense industrial base to make sure we quickly field that capability to make sure we do maintain overmatch.
I wonder, Secretary Lord, you talked about creative compliance, using the authorities that we've been given, and we've seen, I think we've seen an ecosystem emerge over the last couple of years. In particular, that helps young startup companies who are trying to figure out how to do business with the DoD. If you look at those existing authorities and you look at it in terms of antiquated processes or other things that we could do better, how would you respond to that? Just because it seems like we're doing better, but it still seems like we're not doing enough.
I agree with that. And I think, again, it comes back to a lot of training. Right now, Congress really has given DoD a lot of authorities. Probably the one thing that everyone would wish in the building is to be able to move around funding from PE line to PE line. However, I think what the issue is that we need to really learn what we have now in what we named the Adaptive Acquisition Framework and learn how to use what those authorities are. So for instance, the Defense Acquisition University has started giving TED Talks using actual operators, not people that have been retired for 30 or 40 years and are lecturing, but the actual users who are in the field that need the capability, talking about how they went in and used what they need. We need more of that experiential learning and showing what can be done. Right now, most of our systems are hardware enabled, yet software defined. And the rate at which software is being developed is very, very quick, much more quickly than the hardware. So I think what we need to do is make sure that we can have steps and sets on the software, and we need to embrace the software pathway to do that. Now, what we have to do is make sure we reward that behavior as well. And that's partially comes from within DoD, but also from Congress to make sure they recognize when that is done. So again, experiential learning, allowing people to fail, making sure that we delegate authority to the lowest level possible, and get going with it all. Again, the rapid capabilities offices within all the services don't have any special authorities. They just have a VFR direct to senior leadership to get the communications and move quickly. So I think there is a responsibility both on acquisition professionals, but also on service leadership, agency leadership, the department leadership, to make sure they engage to have those conversations so we can move forward.
Yeah, thanks a lot on that, and I apologize for our technology issues there in the background noise. I think we've got it more or less under control, at least for now. General Thurgood, you want to chime in on Secretary Lord's thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So I think Honorable Lord's exactly right. I remember a very distinct time when I was in her office in the Pentagon trying to get a decision. And we got the decision we needed. And she said, why did it take so long? And I said, well, there's this staffing process we go through. And she was very clear with me. And she may not remember that she said, if you have a problem, you need to come direct to me. And it gets to the heart of the issue that she just talked about, right? Our processes are historically designed to be a systems of checks and balances. That is maybe not synonymous with speed. And sometimes that causes a dilemma. So most of the rapid offices, like the office I was asked to stand up in the Army, has a direct link to the Secretary of the Army. I'm a direct report to the Secretary of the Army. That shortens that decision chain to one person. But what you have to do in order to do that is have both the operational background and credibility and the acquisition background and credibility that Honorable Lord talked about. And I actually used, it's funny, the Honorable Lord, I did a TED talk for DAU last year and talked about this very principle, which is that we can do wicked hard things very fast and to standard, and we don't actually need to change the law. We can use the law to actually help us. And my experience has been in this job that Congress actually wants us to do that. And if we're transparent with Congress, I go to Congress every quarter, I lay out every penny I spend for every reason. I showed a Congress the metrics I look at, very transparent. And the result of that is that transparency and that direct authority, when those two things are aligned, then you can accelerate at the speed of relevance. And I would add to that pace by resourcing, right? You can make decisions really fast, but if you don't have the resources to execute those decisions, then you may not be able to operate at the speed of our adversary. And then the other thing I would add to that, I was thinking about this morning when I was running. Sometimes we compare the speed of our adversary or the speed of business against the speed of government as if we all played by the same set of rules. And in fact, we don't. Our adversary rule sets and how they get to and what risks they're willing to accept and what we do is different. I think the magic of all of that is to take the best of everything and figure out how to mold those together within the law for the successful outcomes. And if we can do that, and hypersonics is a really good example where we can do things to standard at a fast pace. When we have a short decision cycle, we have a clear threat, we have a clear requirement, and there's not ambiguity about those outcomes. And then I think the processes actually help us. I don't think they become a hindrance to us, if that's helpful. Over.
Bo, I don't know if you can hear me now. This is General.
Yeah, General Holt, we're good to go. Yeah, I don't know. We've had some discussion about the threat, of course, and then talking about kind of internally how we are organized in order to increase the pace of acquisition. So please take some time and address those two things.
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to hear what was going on. You just couldn't hear me, so I apologize for that. But we've had a lot of comm problems in the Pentagon, and maybe that's part of the point this morning. The threat, just brief discussion of the threat, because you're quite right, Bo, when you and I have talked before, where we concentrate, obviously, in DOD on the military instrument of national power. That is not, as General Thurgood pointed, that is not the way that our adversary is operating. Our adversary, I would estimate, started a concerted effort, what I would call warfare against us, around 1979. We could argue about the time frame that their focus became singular on that, and using every instrument of national power that they have as if it were one. You look at Belt and Road, a lot of us have been fast asleep thinking that's just an economic initiative. Well, in fact, now there's 150 nations under Chinese leadership in Belt and Road. The latest one I saw, just happened by CNN, was Italy to join that under Chinese leadership for trade in the world. If we think about that as just an economic initiative, the next time we try a diplomatic initiative against China, you will start to see those folks that are in catastrophic debt to China with U.S. diplomacy eroding rapidly. Another disturbing trend is we've seen more cooperation between China and Russia on this front as well. You see a natural gas pipeline going between Russia and Germany. Will that improve our diplomacy with Western Europe or harm it? I think China understands all this very well. The projects that they're doing, there's a deep water port, I understand, going into Freeport, Bahamas, at a cost of some $3 billion. Many nations across Central America, South America, Africa have started to wake up to exactly what their plans are, just under One Belt, One Road. Bolivia, as a matter of fact, asked UK and US to restructure their debt so they could get out from underneath One Belt, One Road. And where is the money going to come from for us to try to exert the same economic power? We have to understand this is a whole of, not even just a whole of government problem, a whole of nation problem. And when we focus on the military side, certainly we have to accelerate everything. And as you ask, how is this influencing, our strategy, at least in Air Force contracting? We are tearing down the rules. We are pushing authority to the tactical edge. We are empowering young folks to make decisions at the point of relevance where the understanding is the best, and literally accelerating everything. Meanwhile, however, I fear that there's some structural problems that we have. We are still, for example, trying to use the 1961 Robert McNamara conceived PPBS process to fight China with. The process that General Thurgood talked through on the authorities that he has and the interaction and transparency he has with Congress. If you could imagine doing that for every acquisition program for all money, instead of just one pot of gold, and instead of Congress putting the name of every program on every dollar that's appropriated, broadening up the flexibility during execution year to take advantage of opportunities and threats and emerging technologies that come up both from within the defense industrial base and from the commercial sector. I would argue China actually has more access to our commercial technologies than DoD does. Every time I turn around in contracting, we add another clause to my contracts. There may be good reasons for it. Cybersecurity maturity model, Section 889, the most recent vaccine mandate. But every time I add another clause, more cost, more compliance risk to doing business with DoD, we are literally chasing the companies that inside of America right to China. So we need to start thinking systemically and not linearly about this problem. And we need to stop being so shy about using our economic and information power in the world, because short of complete military overmatch, I don't see that China's definition of victory even requires them to face our military. I think they can go all the way to achieving complete victory and control of all decisions made by businesses, made by government officials, without ever having to face our military. Over.
Hey, Bo, if I might just build on that for a minute.
Please.
I think what Cameron's talking about is really spot on, and that we've been in this gray zone of conflict, below open kinetic warfare, particularly with China, for quite some time. And in fact, the current DepSecDef Kath Hicks actually worked on a big study, co-authored a big study on this before joining the department. And it brings out the point that our defense industrial base, I think, is really the nexus of US economic security and national security. And they're so intertwined that we see these attacks on our economic well-being, which chip away at our national security. And that's why I think we have to realize that our defense industrial base needs to be broader, and that it's very important for them to be funded, to be able to get on contract. And while we all know that cybersecurity is probably the fastest growing threat we've seen in the last few years, we cannot ignore it. We need hardened systems. We cannot study the problem forever. And we have to move out there. And frankly, if there continues to be a lot of uncertainty, whether it be around CMMC or vaccines or whatever, we're just going to see more and more and more of industry step away from national security. And that's the exact opposite of what we want. So we have to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar. Everybody gets that. That's what Congress is particularly worried about. We have to be compliant, therefore legal, but we need that decision cycle to move a lot faster. And our current POM builds and the way we build budgets, it just isn't moving at the speed of relevance. And there's a lot of activity out there looking at alternatives, but I think we need the administration and we need Congress to really put forward an urgent demand signal for doing things better, because we just don't have the reps and sets that the Chinese do to field capability forward.
Hey, General Thurgood, you want to chime in?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts there. I think they all kind of link together. So, right, earlier we talked about the rule sets we play by, and Cameron's talking about those rule sets that he operates within the contracting world, which continually get redefined and basis on the crisis of the day, I would just say. And he gave the recent example of the recent mandates. And we talk about innovation in this process, right? If our adversaries are playing by a different set of business rules and how they reach out and contract and versus the rules we play by, then that speed is going to be a different outcome. It prevents a different outcome. Innovation is really an interesting thing. When we met before, I just briefly mentioned, I'll do it here. Innovation is something that happens at the point of need and when it's available. Innovation is really hard to schedule. It's like invention, right? It's hard to schedule an invention. And when we don't have the funding capability to be responsive when industry is being responsive to a threat, because we're pretty clear with industry on where we have seams and gaps, when we can't respond to that in a manner that helps them be successful in business, then they're going to leave that domain, right? They're going to leave that operational outcome, and we may miss the opportunity. And so I mentioned earlier that when we go to Congress it took me 2 years, and Congress actually gave us, the Army, a set of dollars called innovation. And it's not against a requirement, it's against an idea. And so I go back every quarter and I tell them exactly what we're doing with those dollars, to be transparent, to build that confidence, because we're not going to get past the oversight. It's part of this great thing we call the Republic. And we got to embrace that rather than avoid it. And we actually see that we can get to these small and medium-sized companies in a much different way without changing the law that Honorable Lord mentioned earlier. We don't have to change the law. I get asked this all the time. How do you do this so fast? What laws did you change? I didn't change any laws. We found creative ways to apply the laws for the positive outcomes we need to get to the innovation at the time of innovation, not on a POM cycle time that Cameron mentioned, because that's a problematic thing for us if we let the traditional process drive our behavior over.
That's great. I'd like to take it down a level or so and just talk about risk orientation and how we train acquisition professionals. So, I mean, you could argue that the fact that we have a office called the Rapid Capabilities Office is sort of an indicator that we're not acquiring things rapidly, at least at scale, because we have to set up sort of a workaround, if you will. And so we've trained acquisition officers for years to, quote, keep commanders out of trouble. And so I just wonder if you could talk about culturally how to pivot, or how to at least perhaps change that thought process that we've built into the system in some ways. And we'll start, Secretary Lord, with you, if you're okay.
Yeah, this is a great question, Bo. And I think it comes back to the fundamentals of communication. We do not have a rapid communication cycle and as open of a communication cycle as I believe we need within DoD. And I think there's some structural and cultural reasons around that. I would hypothesize what makes us very, very good when we go to war or we go into any kind of conflict is the fact that every individual in the military knows exactly the box they are in, who they report to, who reports to them, who are their peers, what they are allowed to do, what they are not allowed to do, where they can be creative, if you will, and where they don't have decision authority. That works very well for complex movements and has proven itself out. The dilemma is when you get into a lot of these business issues, the senior level commanders, if you will, whether that be military or civilian, they might not have the information for a number of reasons or even the context to be able to make the best decisions. And it goes very much against people's training, as I've seen it when I was in the Pentagon, to sit around a table and have a free-flowing conversation beyond 3 or 4 people, because rank comes in to play, and no one wants to speak up if their superior is there, and they, would rather pass them a note and let them be the one to talk about it. That is very, very hard to do when you're dealing with complex business situations, and it might be the 23-year-old in the room who's only been there for a month or so who has the most relevant information, but they are not empowered to speak. We also staff things through many different levels, which you need to do for big policies and so forth, but perhaps isn't always as effective. So I think we really need to think about the speed of communication and making sure that the right people hear the right information at the right time, instead of having 5 layers of people filter it for them to try to help their boss, keep a cleaner kind of desk and so forth. So that's hard in a large, complex organization, but somehow we have to take the behavior that we've made work in the rapid capabilities offices, regardless of which service it is. We need to fast track those discussions about critical acquisition issues, not only within the department, but sometimes it gets into interagency, sometimes it gets into Congress, but there is training that keeps people from picking up the phone and calling people to have a conversation. And even if they have the intestinal fortitude to do so, there are a whole lot of people in a lot of front offices that are protecting their boss from hearing this noise in the background. So it's not simple, but man, we just have to change the way we communicate and kind of get rid of all of the stuff that is context, I think, instead of core in what we all need to do.
Great. General Holt, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would. When you're dealing with this massive of a change, you have to first explain why, all the way down to the lowest levels of the organization. So, for one example, I generated a secret no foreign brief with the help of the intel community, and I briefed that at town halls all across America to our contracting folks. Not one word about FAR 15402, all about the threat. They need to see their leader in contracting talking about the threat that we face, and then why our expertise in contracting is so important in responding to that threat. So we have shifted from what I would call our past as compliance-focused business advisors to now mission-focused business leaders. And we actually have a strategic plan on that front where, any one of us can do what's called innovation theater, and I saw that in the chat side. We can set up a group of what I call cool kids, a rapid capabilities office, or selectively man something, give it access to rapid decision-making authority, and it will succeed. But what we've got to do is we've got to move that cool kids to be the main workforce. And to do that, we've got to find ways to flatten our hierarchies, flatten the space between where the idea comes from and the decision that can be made. In some cases, that means pushing authority out to the tactical edge, which we are doing in Air Force contracting. But in some cases, it means getting the decision to the decision maker as fast as you can get it there, And in some cases, it means skipping the large layers of bureaucracy to get to do that. So you've got to change the culture. You've got to change the actual structure and the plan and how people are trained from the very beginning all the way up. And the leaders have to change. And in my view, if the risk posture of our leadership doesn't change, there's no hope for the risk posture of the entire department to change. We as senior leaders have to be willing to be the blast shield. We have to be willing to face down the DC recrimination culture and say, we are going to make a decision. It may be unpopular. We might make mistakes along the way and get criticized by the GAO or the IG or the Washington Post, but we are going to keep our legs moving. And the only thing we won't stand behind is an ethical breach. But beyond that, we're absolutely going to do that to go forward. If our young folks don't see us taking on that risk and stop fearing embarrassment more than we fear the enemy, then there's really not a hope for us to change this. But the strategic plan we have uses objectives and key results as a methodology, which is decidedly not military. But it has been very effective, and we've got 83 key result teams operating simultaneously across 4 lines of effort that are staffed all the way down to the lowest levels of the Air Force. And we're starting to become a learning organization that can actually self-organize around some of these innovations, and they don't require my approval. So I agree, you got to change everything, but we also do, I don't want to let Congress off the hook too much. Because the resourcing problems that we have and the way that money is labeled with the program name on it, you might as well put the company name on it. We've got to have greater flexibility in execution year. China's use of predatory capital practices inside of our own markets, they've realized that instead of stealing IP, which is actually pretty expensive, they can actually just buy it, and it's really cheap. And you can put a small equity stake in a small company, make sure the founder is rich for the rest of their lives, take that IP and give it to a Chinese company, and then squeeze DOD out. And they're doing that methodically. So the training gap that we have in contracting is we've got to teach our folks business. We've got to teach our folks venture capital markets and private equity and institutional investment, because that is one of the new battlefields that we face to control our own IP and stop fueling China's rise with our own American companies and our own innovation. And we're getting after all that.
Well, General Thurgood, we got about a minute or two left. Want to close us out on this this topic?
I think there's some really good points, and I'll just highlight them in 3 areas real quickly. So Honorable Lord has tried to, and successfully in many accounts, tailor. We can't treat a small thing like a big thing. We can't treat a big thing like a small thing. We don't have to change the law. We have to do what we think is right and take the risk to do what is right, right? Kind of like Cameron said. I was told one time I had a thing that didn't go very well, and I got a note from a friend who said, look, the caravan's passing, dogs bark, keep working. So that's what you have to do, is take the risk, and you gotta back the risk of the people below you. Number 2, this idea of threat is really important. In our office, we have a above TSCI brief every month to our entire team. We keep them focused on the problem. And the problem begins with our understanding of the threat. So keeping that relevant. And the last thing I would say this whole thing encompasses on, if you want to push that down, you want to accept risk, we have to change the culture. One of the ways we try to do that in our organization is I actually I'm sending my deputies to industry executive training. We do a great job of bringing people to industry into government training. We got to reverse that. So it took me a year to convince a company, God bless them. And so we're sending our executives to their executive training, not ours. We know our system. We want to understand what they're doing and how we do that better. I would put that under the disguise of what I learned in combat, right? If you want decisions at the lowest level, everybody has to have a common understanding and a shared visualization. They have to know why they're there and what they're doing and what their battle space is to operate in. And then let them make those decisions. Let them and cover that risk, and it will be successful. I've seen it in many, many organizations. When we have a common understanding and shared visualization of the desired outcome, it's a very powerful tool to bring the entire team together for that outcome. Over.
Great. Well, I think we could go on for about another 2 hours for sure. And I have about 10 questions we weren't able to get to. I want to thank all of you for your time again today. Really provocative thoughts, and it added a lot to the dialogue. And on behalf of America's Future Series, thanks so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
David, back to you guys.
Thank you all. And you guys are the cool kids, by the way.
It is quite the trifecta.
Yeah.
Secretary Lord and General Holt and General Thurgood, and certainly Major General Young. Thank you. Well done once again. We thank you all very much, above and beyond. And happy Veterans Day. Thanks for your service. Thanks for all you continue to do. This was just great. It really was. They are the cool kids.
They are the
great.
cool kids, and they're serious. They're very, very serious about this. So
Yeah.
we appreciate you're doing our nation proud. Thank you, sir.
Yep, very much so.
Thank you all.